today's video, you will learn about how to identify holistic student potential in your admissions process and why this is important. Let's talk about holistic success. Welcome to the very first episode of our Holistic Success Show. Our channel is dedicated to looking at all aspects of holistic success within higher education, whether it's taking a holistic approach to admissions, program management, or data insights to boost student and program success. Here with me is Dr. Kelly Dore to talk specifically about identifying holistic student potential in the admissions process. Dr. Dore is the co-founder and VP of Science and Innovation at Acuity Insights, as well as an adjunct professor at McMaster University in Canada. She is one of the creators of the Casper Situational Judgement test that is widely used in higher education today for holistic admissions. She is an international speaker as well on a variety of topics related to higher education and is a thought leader in holistic admissions and overall holistic success. Welcome, Kelly. Let's get started.
Thanks,
So
Anju.
my first question to you is, for those who think it might be a little too buzzwordy, what actually is holistic student potential? Why is it an important consideration in the admissions process?
That's a great question, Anju, because we've certainly been hearing a lot about holistic admissions and holistic success and how we think about it. And what we want to realize is that it's not really that different than what we've been trying to do all along, trying to get that more complete picture of who the applicant is and their likelihood of success. Up until now, though, we've done that mostly based on grades or GPA because those are easy numbers for us to manage. But what we're realizing is that there's actually more information that's out there that we can pull in to get that more complete picture of who all of our applicants are at the early stages of our admissions process. I use the analogy of adding more pixels to the picture to get a clearer and clearer image of who these applicants are. So it's about finding a way that aligns to your program's own mission, but to really figure out who each of these applicants are while managing the resources of your program. So when we think about holistic admissions, it can feel overwhelming and stressful and like it's going to take all of our program's resources. But really think about it as that, every applicant who knocks on your door, you're looking at not just their academic metrics, but you're able to include things about their life experience or, who they are as a person to really get a sense of their likelihood of success.
Thanks so much for clarifying that, Kelly. That was a great sort of primer on holistic student potential. What are programs missing out on when they don't identify holistic student potential during admissions? Because not everyone at this point is really thinking about looking at every applicant that way.
Absolutely. So, sometimes programs look at it as a resource cost, that it's too difficult to identify, life experiences or more about who the applicant is. And so they take, sort of shortcuts where they just have GPA cutoffs or they might have other standardized exams that they use to sort of help them wean down their pool of applicants to who they're going to admit, et cetera. But we need to think about the benefits of holistic admission, for both those incoming to your program and the success of them during your program. So when we think about success in program, one of the things that we know is it's not just academics that get in our way. Because data that we have on remediation shows that if there's a knowledge gap or something around their academics, we actually know how to remediate that quite well in higher ed. We're actually pretty good at that. We can send them to clear resources. We can measure it to know that they're progressing. But what we don't do very well is remediate those issues in whether it's professionalism or communication or other areas, of skill that we know are important to a student's success. And what that means is twofold. One, we might be admitting students, if we're not looking at them holistically, who are going to struggle in our program, who don't, just haven't yet got to the place where they may have the knowledge, but they don't have the ability to be successful in the program. And so we're either going to have to spend a lot of resources remediating them, or unfortunately, we may see attrition, which is sort of the last thing that we want, because that's not good for the program or the student themselves. And so we want to think about them. How do we make sure that we're bringing in folks who are going to be successful? The other thing, too, is that we want to be bringing in people who are going to be successful longer term as well, which means from the very beginning that we're thinking about, are our graduates not only going to be a great representation for our program, but are we setting them up for success in their profession long term? And what we know is that, it's not just somebody's knowledge or technical skills that are going to lead them to success at the end of the day, because those things are actually changing pretty rapidly in the world that we live in, but it's their ability to communicate their ideas, to get other people excited, to understand the folks who are around the table and different ideas and different perspectives, and to be able to bring all those folks together. Those are the people who are not only just going to be the leaders of tomorrow, but who are going to be incredibly successful. And when we look at our program as a whole, we need to look at what we're teaching and we're training. And we tend not to teach those skills like communication or professionalism or things like that. So we want to bring in folks to our program who are already very, very strong in those areas. What that means is that we're bringing in folks not only who are going to be able to get through our program, but who are going to excel afterwards. I'll just comment too that there's value at the beginning too. The beginning means that if we're looking more holistically at the applicants applying to our program, we're going to be considering a wider range of applicants, not just those who have perfect GPAs or perfect standardized test scores. We're going to be including applicants who have had very, very different life experiences, who maybe have demonstrated resiliency in different areas, or who have demonstrated commitment to their profession in a very different way. And those are folks that we want to make sure we're bringing in as well. Those are folks who create not just, great future professionals, but a really well-rounded class for our students to engage with and engage in, and to have a great, successful career.
That is so true, Kelly. And you made a really good point about it's not just how students will perform within the program and while at university, but also how will they take all of this into their careers and continue to be like really impactful professionals going forward. So thanks for outlining that for us. And I think you have mentioned a few things that professional admissions professionals should be thinking about
Mhm.
as they go about identifying potential holistically. But specifically, what are some of the key things that they need to be looking at to make sure that they are looking at students holistically or applicants holistically as they just step into higher education?
Absolutely. So when we think about looking holistically, it can feel overwhelming and daunting, but let's just pull it back to the basic bare bones. When we think about looking at our applicants more holistically, we're thinking about going beyond just those academic metrics, those easy to use numbers, to thinking about a little bit more about who the applicant is. And so that might include a little bit about their life experiences. It might include a little bit more about their what sometimes people refer to as soft skills, which is, their communication, collaboration, professionalism. Are they going to be a good team player? Do they have resiliency? Those other factors that we know is going to determine their success. And so it's starting with understanding as well that when you want to consider these other metrics, you're not aiming for perfection, you're aiming for progress. So thinking about it doesn't mean you need to spend 8 hours combing through every student application, because we know in many cases that is not possible. But it's about making sure you're including data points early on, which include a broader representation of who the student is beyond just their numbers. So thinking about in your program, what makes somebody successful? Who are the successful trainees? Sure, there are folks who have the knowledge or the academic aptitude, but there's also other people who deeply engage with the community, people who work really well with their peers or their teams, people who go above and beyond, are creative thinkers who are not just solving the problems of today, but are going to be the ones solving the problems of tomorrow that we don't even know about yet. And so it's thinking about who's successful And then how do you nurture that in your program? Because I mentioned before, there's a lot of effort that we make in our programs in our schools focusing on conveying knowledge or technical skills, depending on what we're teaching to our students. But we don't always dig in as much as we need to on the other pieces that are going to make them successful, that resiliency or how to communicate or teamwork. And so, is there a way to bring that in early on in order to make sure that we're evolving our students? And again, that doesn't mean that everybody is going to be able to run interviews. It doesn't mean that everybody, that we're using personal statements and that we're reading every single one of those in detail for all of our applicants, but it's making sure that we're meaningfully collecting data on who these applicants are very early on, so that we're balancing out and not just using academic cutoffs, but thinking more holistically about that person and who's going to succeed in our program.
Yeah, so in terms of the tools that people could use, we've talked about getting the academic information that you
Mhm.
need through things like the GPA. We've talked about maybe personal statements that highlight things like community service and things that you may have done. What about soft skills that you have mentioned? And you being the co-creator of a situational judgment test, I think that is another tool that people could be looking at.
Absolutely. So, situational judgment tests have been around for a little while. For those of you who aren't familiar with them, they present standardized scenarios to applicants that they need to respond to. These are scenarios that applicants can relate to. So, whether they're coming out of high school and they're scenarios about, conflicts with friends, or they're somebody who's been in a bachelor's degree program or something and they're going on to further training, and they might get more complex scenarios. Situational judgment tests allow us to defensively and validly measure somebody's personal and professional attributes in a standardized yet defensible way. So we need to make sure that we're including data points like that. One of the great things as well that I'll just add about situational judgment tests, which is just a great feature, is that what we know about our academic tests that we're measuring, they tend to have a lot more bias in whether it's a standardized test or sometimes in GPA against applicants. Now, that's not just racial bias, but it can be socioeconomic bias. It can be sometimes gender bias that exists. And the difficulty is that those tend to sometimes exist with our reference letters and our personal statements as well. What situational judgment tests offer is a different way to measure the soft skills or personal professional attributes in a defensible way that actually have significantly less bias than what we're used to with the academic tests. So what's great is that not only are you getting that more holistic, well-rounded picture of who applicants are early on by knowing something about their academics, but also something about their personal and professional attributes. But when you put them together, what's great is that the smaller biases seen in situational judgment tests can actually dilute the impact of the bias seen in academic or other standardized academic tests. So it's actually a double win in that case, in that not only are you getting a broader picture of these applicants, but you're actually doing it in a more equitable way. So it's a great way to think about adding information, but because it's not something that's scored by the programs or something that has to be reviewed individually for each applicant, it comes as a data point that's easy to integrate. Because that's one of the key pieces of holistic admissions, and why it can feel so overwhelming is the resources it implies for the programs and for the students applying. If you think about having to write a reference letter for every school that you're applying to, a personal statement about why you want to go there, it can take days or weeks to do one for each program. And so thinking about having to just do one assessment that allows a more defensible score about who you are as a person, including sort of your life experiences and other aspects, that can be a massive time savings for that applicant, but also for the program, creating an opportunity to do more holistic admissions when that door may otherwise not have been open.
Yes, thanks for that, Kelly. Those personal statements or personal essays or whatever you may call them, we've all been through it, or we know people in our lives who have been through it, and definitely it's a very time-consuming thing to write. And then you do wonder, how long it takes someone to read it at the other end as
Mhm.
well. So thank you for clarifying, what tools we should be looking at to assess potential more holistically. And, in circumstances where there are lots of applicants to a university, and you have to make a really, you have to make a selection decision, having a variety of tools like this is good. What would you say about applying a similar sort of process to even schools where there may be a decline in enrollment? How does it how does it help to continue to use that kind of process, and what kind of dividends can schools expect?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Anju, because I think, that's where a lot of higher education is looking as we look at, the money students have for, whether it's going to college or further on in training, it can be overwhelming. And so schools might be worried about, what this means if they're worried about their enrollment or their applications. And so what I say is that this actually does open opportunities for schools that have lower application rates as well. And there's a variety of different reasons why that is, but a lot of it is thinking about who considers themselves eligible or open to taking that higher education training or that course. And so there are many times where students coming from high school or elsewhere may not realize that that door is open to them to get into college or to get into the higher education program. And sometimes that's because we've set artificially high markers with our academic metrics. So we've set these high GPA or high standardized test scores to get into our program because either we had a lot of applicants before, sometimes it's a prestige balance with, other perspectives in our universities who want to make sure we have higher cutoffs because of the implication that has around who we are as an institution and how successful we are. But it also creates more barriers to people thinking that they can apply, even to advisors or counselors who are helping folks decide where to apply. It can, if we've got these artificially high academics because that's the way we manage our numbers, we're going to give the perception that folks can't apply there or they shouldn't be applying there. But really, what does it take to be successful in the profession that we're setting them up for? What does that mean? And as we talked about earlier, it's not just academics, it's who they are. And if somebody has incredible resiliency and grit, and somebody has incredible communication skills, but maybe their grades are just sort of in that average bar, you know what, they can still be incredibly successful in our programs. But we've only opened the doors to those who have strong academic markers. What about those who have midline academics, but these incredible personal and professional attributes or life experiences, which is going to make sure that when they struggle in university, they're going to keep going. Or if they're struggling in their training because it's complex and it's getting harder as they go along, that they have that resiliency to keep going, and they've had experiences where maybe they've struggled before. They're not the people who have had never really had to study so hard and have had perfect grades, and then all of a sudden they hit higher education and they start to struggle and they've never had to deal with that before. So it's thinking about how do we bring in the folks who are just as likely or maybe even more likely in some cases to be successful. And that means not using the same metrics we've always been using. It means we now know better that other folks are going to be successful professionals. It's not just about their marks or their grades. It's about who they are as a person and how they're going to collaborate with others or be able to engage in a team to get a project across the line when it's really hard. It's those folks, and how do we allow higher institutions to really see that by opening the doors to those folks, not only do they get a broader picture of who's coming into their program, but they're actually opening the doors to more people if there's been a decline in applications.
Higher education is so much about access and providing that opportunity for success to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you just said, Kelly, like connects directly to the next question that I had for you, which is, how does this approach to identifying holistic student potential align with the mission of higher education institutions.
Right. And I think, what gets me excited about holistic admissions is this really opportunity to feed directly into mission and feed directly into the communities that these institutions are supporting. So we know that mission is incredibly important for programs. But mission is not just all about grades, and it's not just all about somebody's, academic ability to write a multiple choice test. What it is about creating a community, whether that community is geographically local or a community of practice that they're specifically creating, that is going to nurture and support, the world around them. Whether you're creating folks who are going to be solving incredibly complex problems or who are going to be serving needs in the community that maybe aren't even met, that what we need to do is think not just about people who tick the boxes academically, but who are going to be holistically there to support their community, to engage and solve the problems. The world is only getting more complex as we go forward, and we're going to need more than ever people who can work together, who can communicate, who can understand diverse perspectives, who, have the resiliency and the determination to get through, not just those who know the facts, because in fact, we know that increasingly they can look up the facts in the moment, because those facts are sometimes changing or sometimes evolving. And so it's thinking about, to serve your mission, are you creating graduates who are really thinking, about the whole problem or just the knowledge pieces of that? And so I really do think that thinking holistically about your applicants and your students and your program is what's going to allow you to align to that mission.
So well said, Kelly. Thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask, like, we are coming to the close, but there's a few other really good questions that
Mhm.
I have for you. Um, is there anything else you'd like to add about the importance of looking at student potential holistically? You've done such a great job of, like helping us understand why this is important. Is there anything else we should
Well,
know?
I think, Anju, you mentioned it earlier, but it's also about creating access to higher education. And are we doing our best to make sure that we're not putting artificial barriers in place for access to higher education? And I would argue that by just having academics, and maybe, or even using non-defensible or bias-filled ways of doing our admissions process, that in fact potentially we're doing harm with creating access to higher education.
Yeah, thank you. Something quite serious for us to ponder on. Um, so, if there were three main takeaways that you would want to leave our audiences with, what would those be as we wrap things up?
Right. Well, I think the first is understand your own resources. When we say holistic admissions, it's not solely, 8-hour intensive deep dive on each applicant. As I said before earlier, it's about progress, not perfection. And so making sure that it's not, if you can't do it all, that you should do nothing. It's what is attainable and doable for you, and what steps can you take towards a more holistic process. I think the second point I would make is, again, looking at, your students and your program, and consider what it actually takes for them to be successful and what you're nurturing in your program. And then think about what you should be measuring in your admissions process. So, taking those as sort of a bit of a formula to figure out, are you measuring the right things, or are you, maybe just focusing on academics, more so, what does it take to actually be successful? And the third point I would make is ask for help. This thought of moving to a more holistic process can feel very, very overwhelming, but there's a lot of resources out there to guide you. We're in fact working on a holistic white paper that's coming out, but even more so, there's an opportunity here to engage with your peers, whether it's at conferences or in smaller groups, creating these communities of practice to help nurture and decide what is holistic admissions, what does that mean for your program or your institution, and how can you get support to move in that direction?
Thanks for all of this great information, Kelly. If anyone wants to reach out to you or connect with you, because I'm sure people have a million questions to ask and would love to seek your advice further. What would be the best way to reach you?
Absolutely. So, for sure, follow me on LinkedIn because we'll be posting lots of great content there that will be useful. I'm also going to be speaking at a lot of conferences in the near future. So, if you check your local conference, see if I'm chatting there, feel free to grab me and we can chat and talk about your specific program, questions you might have, etc.
That's great, Kelly. Thanks for all of this wonderful information. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for watching and listening. So, there are two things I want to say before we completely close off. One is um, you've heard the information for reaching out to Kelly, but if you want to stay connected with Acuity Insights, just go to acuityinsights.com and sign up for our newsletter. We have great information that we release every 2 weeks at this point. And that covers admissions, program management, as well as data and insights for student and program success. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, this is our very first one, as I mentioned before, please subscribe to the show and be sure to share it with your colleagues. Catch you in the next episode. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Be sure to check out our upcoming videos. The next one coming up is on MSPE, letters that help learners take the next step in their medical education journey. And the one after that is about how to use Casper in your admissions process to reduce demographic differences. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.